Hello and welcome to the Introduction to Cabinet Vision Solid video series. In this video, we're going to cover the system preferences. To access the system preferences, we need to click on the application button to open up the application menu. Once we have that open, we can just click on the preferences button. Before we do that, I would like to explain that depending on what level of the program you are currently in, such as the splash screen, job, or otherwise, the preferences may appear a little different. Since we are in the splash screen of Cabinet Vision, we will be working with the system preferences. The dialog that is displayed is the preferences dialog. You can see that the user interface is slightly different than that of the splash screen. The dialog still has the ability to close the window, but we have a new button, the question mark. This allows us to get quick help for specific controls in the window. Just to clarify, a control is a user interface element that you, the user, interacts with. As an example, let's click on the question mark, then click on the box directly below the company name. You can see that a pop-up is displayed that gives a brief description of what you are supposed to do. Next, we can see that the preferences are broken up into a series of tabs. Each tab is a logical grouping of preferences. Finally, we have the OK and Cancel buttons. These buttons determine whether or not any changes we make are saved. If I click OK, the changes are stored in the system and propagated wherever they need to go. If I hit Cancel, any changes I've made are discarded. Let's go over the preferences now. The first tab that is displayed is the User tab. This tab contains preferences that define you, the user. These can be used later on with CAD tools. We can define the company name, the address, a contact name, as well as the contact information and any comments you want. I will point out that these values are per system, per user. That means should I log off this user account on the computer and log in as a different user, these values will be different. Also, network users will each have their very own values here as well. The next tab is the Modules tab. This tab allows us to define any module preferences that we have available to us. For instance, Job Site Companion needs to know where the briefcase path is for document sharing. We can specify this here. Any and all modules that have system preferences will be listed in this tab. Moving on, we have the Measurement Units tab. Much like in the status bar, we can specify how the units are displayed. We change the unit type here. We can also specify the imperial precision and metric precision separately. And finally, we can enable or disable the ability to switch units in the status bar. Next up is the General tab. Here we get to set general system preferences such as the undo stack size. Now let me pause here and explain what the undo stack is for a moment. Let's say that this represents an action that we performed in Cabinet Vision. Now let's say we performed another action. As you can see, that action is stacked up on top of our last action. From here we can undo to remove the last action that was performed, or the one that is on the top of the stack. Now, if we fill up our undo stack, which mine was set to 5, what would happen if we put another action on? As you can see, the first action disappeared and we can no longer get it back. A cautionary note, the larger my undo stack, the more memory Cabinet Vision will allocate to undo actions. So setting it too high can cause system resources to be eaten up very quickly. Next, we can set the span between each autosave function, which will create a new autosave file every X number of minutes, as specified here. We can also specify the maximum number of recent jobs that are shown in our recent job list menu in the application menu. We can also specify that we want to have Cabinet Vision save the last job path. This comes in handy when I set a custom location for job files, and I don't want to have Cabinet Vision open the default path all the time. If I uncheck this, it will make sure that whatever the current job path is will always be the job path. Finally, we have the ability to specify that we want to create a special backup file every time we open a job. This will ensure that should anything happen while I'm opening the job or as I get into it, I have a backup to revert to if I need. I am now going to select the next tab, which is on the top of the tab stack. Watch the tab stack as I click on it. You can see that the tab stack is changed so that the active tab row is on the bottom. So this is the message log options tab. This list is the list of all the warning messages that Cabinet Vision will provide to you as you are building your objects in Cabinet Vision. For each message, there is a checkbox. If the item is checked, then that means Cabinet Vision will process information regarding that message and notify you if there are any issues. For warnings that you do not want to be notified about, you can simply come here and uncheck the warning. The option here at the bottom of the tab is the length of time that any warning message will be displayed to you in seconds. Just change this value to make the messages stay on screen for longer periods of time or shorter periods of time. The Geometry tab contains several options that pertain to CNC output. Even if you don't have the S2M Center, I recommend that you set these up as needed for when you do eventually get the S2M Center. So we have Hide Unmatched Master Operations. To really understand what this option means, you need to know how operations work in Cabinet Vision. As you can see, this option asks about master operations. Master operations are operations that are placed on a part. When that part comes into contact with another part in a very specific way that is unique to each master operation, a slave operation is added to the touched part. Let's take this bottom and left end connection as an example. The master operation is placed on the bottom here, creating the slave operation on the end here. If I move the bottom away from the end, however, you can see that the boring operation in the end is now missing. This is called an unmatched operation and leaves the operation here. Going back to our preferences, if we enable this option, the master operation that is left behind is hidden from view. Next up is the Include Banding in Cut List Part Size. This allows us to specify that when a part is sent to our cut list reports and CNC machines, the edge banding is considered to be a part of the overall part size. To explain this a little further, let's take a drawer stretcher that is 100 millimeters wide. Now let's say that the front of it has been banded with a 3 millimeter PVC edge. If our option to include banding in the overall part size is not checked, our cut list will read as needing to have a 97 millimeter wide part. If our option is checked, we can go back to that same drawer stretcher and see that our cut list now specifies the part out at 100 millimeters. Next up, you can see that we have the option to incorporate door assembly operations on slab door parts for CNC. Slab doors, like all other doors, need to have hinge cups bored into them, as well as pull holes. This option allows us to specify that we want those drilled out on our CNC machine as secondary operations, or primary operations if it can be done as such. Unchecking this option would be for those that have hinge boring machines that are separate from your CNC machine that you want used. Finally, we get to output buyout doors for CNC. Now, not everybody makes their doors. Sometimes we order our doors from a third party for a number of reasons, but at the end of the day, those doors still need hinge cups bored into them. Again, if you want this done on your CNC machine, just enable this option, and your buyout doors will not be added to your cut list for manufacture, but they will be added as a finished result to your CNC operations when you receive them in. The next tab we can select is the Layout tab. As you can see, it is packed full of options. The options are the default behavior that we want to see out of Cabinet Vision for many different things. Each preference is placed in a logical grouping of other like preferences. Let's start with the Clearances group. This group contains the preferences that define the default clearances between many different object types. The first one being Reefer Side Clearance. This allows us to define the most common clearance that we want on each side of a refrigerator object. Next up, we have the Sink to Sink opening. This isn't a clearance for distances between sinks, rather it is a clearance on either side of a sink when you place it in a cabinet. The window clearance allows us to specify the minimum clearance that objects should be placed next to a window, while the door clearance is not for cabinet doors, but rather it is meant for the clearances next to entrance doors and openings for a room. Floor to upper above reefer allows us to specify a distance from the top of the floor to the bottom of an upper cabinet when that upper cabinet is placed above a refrigerator. Similarly, the floor to upper above range is for the distance from the top of the floor to the bottom of an upper cabinet when it is placed above a range or oven. End of wall clearance allows us to specify the minimum distance an object should stay from the end of a wall, while end wall clearance allows us to specify the minimum distance an object should stay from an end wall. Now that might be a little confusing. To clarify it a bit, we can take a look at this. The end of a wall is just that, the end of a wall, while a wall end is a special wall type. When you make the wall, you can just specify that it's supposed to be a wall end. The difference between a wall end like this one and any objects that are next to the wall end is what end wall clearance means. The next group contains only one preference, the combined toes group. The assembly depth tolerance preference allows us to specify a maximum difference in depth for cabinets that should have combined toe bases. If the depths have a greater difference than what is specified here, the cabinets will each have separate toe bases. The group next to this one is the unfinished ends tolerance. This allows us to specify distances between assemblies before an unfinished end is changed to a finished end, as well as the distance from an assembly to a wall before that happens. The edit group here allows us to specify certain editing options for cabinet vision. For instance, the double-click on assembly wall and elevation mode option. We can make cabinet vision bring us to the assembly editor, which is the default, or we can do our editing directly at the wall elevation. We can also make cabinet vision adjust assemblies when we move appliances on a wall, and we can also choose to ignore wall ends when working in the elevation view. Finally, we can specify that we always want appliances to be centered under windows when we place an appliance under a window. The last group allows us to specify certain defaults for assembly doors. The minimum size allows us to specify the absolute minimum size a door can be before it is removed from the assembly. The maximum size allows us to specify how big a door can get before it is split up into multiple doors. Finally, we can also specify that we want doors that are split up to use pair doors instead of making individual doors for each door opening. The final tab we have to work with is the Lights tab. This tab allows us to set up how the lights inside of a job act. You can see that I have some sub-tabs here. These split up the preferences into subgroups for the different 3D areas that Cabinet Vision has. If I click on the different tabs, you can see that all three tabs contain similar information, but only the Layout tab has the automatic preference group. Because of that, we're just going to cover the Layout tab. Now, I would like to say that each of these boxes is a numeric value that represents the percentage of power that a light has. Think of it like a dimmer switch. A value of 0 turns the light off completely. A value of 100 gives you the maximum power of a light. Any values over 100 overpower the lamp. Be careful doing this, as this can easily provide a washed out look for your renderings. So now you know what each property does to a light. There are 3 lights that are created by default: the ambient light, the headlight, and the main light. Now if we look at our automatic group for our Layout tab, we see several different light types here. Since you know that these represent the relative power of a light, let's just go over what the lights are themselves. The room corner light is a light that is automatically created in the corner of the room. The spot on wall is a spotlight that is created for each wall that is centered on the wall. The door light is a light that is behind an entry door or opening, while a window light is a light that is placed behind a window. Finally, we have the corner light. The corner light is a light that is placed in front of any object that is set in the corner between 2 walls. You can see that each one of these lights has a check mark next to it. This will determine whether or not that light is automatically generated by Cabinet Vision when you place certain things like walls or doors or windows. Thank you for taking the time to watch this Introduction to Cabinet Vision video. We hope that it was enjoyable and informative. Look for more videos in this series to get the most out of Cabinet Vision Solid. For any other questions you may have about Cabinet Vision Solid, please visit our website at www.cabinetvision.com.